Magdalena Vasquez stood up from the kitchen chair when I walked through the front door of the farmhouse my late wife Lena forbade me from visiting for the previous 23 years of our marriage. She looked at me for about 4 seconds without speaking. She told me she'd been expecting me. She said Lena told her, 11 weeks before she died, that I would eventually come through that front door, and that when I did, Magdalena should not try to soften what she was about to say. She turned her head toward the doorway of the living room, visible from the foyer where I was standing, and she said the thing I am going to spend the rest of this story trying to explain to you. She said, "This is Wendell. He's Lena's son. He's been waiting his whole life to meet you." I want to tell you what I saw when I looked into that living room. Here is what I saw. There was a wheelchair, and the man in it was not a boy, but a 36-year-old human being whose body was folded by the particular hand of severe cerebral palsy into a shape that no medical textbook could have entirely prepared me for, and the way his eyes, which were the exact gray-green color of his mother's eyes, found mine across approximately 12 feet of farmhouse hallway and stopped. He made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when he'd been waiting, for a long time, for a thing he was not sure was going to happen. Magdalena walked to the wheelchair. She put her hand on Wendell's shoulder. She said his name, twice, in the steady, patient voice of a woman who'd been saying his name that way for the previous 22 years. She said, "Wendell, this is Jasper. This is the man your mother married." Wendell looked at me. He made the sound again. I stood in the foyer of the farmhouse my wife forbade me from visiting for the previous 23 years, and I tried for the next 90 seconds to remember how to breathe. My name is Jasper Crowley. I am 54 years old. I own an appliance repair business out of a converted 2-bay garage on Copley Road on the west side of Akron, Ohio. I have been fixing washing machines, refrigerators, dishwashers, and ovens with my own hands in the homes of approximately 4,000 customers across the greater Akron metropolitan area for the previous 26 years. I drive a 2017 Ford F-150 with 184,000 miles on the odometer and a tailgate that does not, by any reasonable accounting, close the way the manufacturer intended it to close. My wife, Lena, was a bookkeeper at a 3-partner accounting firm in downtown Akron called Vandermeer and Reese. She died about a year ago of pancreatic cancer. She was 52 years old. We were married for 23 years. She, in those 23 years, took approximately 276 trips to her late parents' farmhouse on the 3rd Saturday of every month, on a 100-mile route between our ranch house in the Ellett neighborhood of Akron and a piece of agricultural land just outside Polk in Ashland County that I had never set foot on before the morning I am about to describe to you. For the last 7 of those years, she made the drive in a 2019 Subaru Outback she bought specifically for the round trip. She told me, on the second date we ever had, that the farmhouse was not a place she was prepared to take anyone. She told me, on the first night we spent together about 3 months later, that she would never, under any circumstances, take me there. She told me, on our wedding day at the Lutheran Church in Cuyahoga Falls, where her Aunt Helga insisted we be married, that I should not, for the rest of our lives together, ask her about it. I did not, for 23 years, ask her about it. I had driven to that farmhouse on the morning I have been describing to you with one specific plan in mind. The plan was to walk through the rooms, take photographs of the property with the cell phone in my pocket, and forward those photographs the same afternoon to a real estate agent in Ashland named Donna Whitaker, who had been waiting, at my request, for the previous 3 weeks to list the property for sale. I had no use for a rural farmhouse 100 miles from where I lived. I was going to take the money from the sale, deposit it in the bank account my dead wife and I had been sharing for the previous 23 years, and put a chapter of my life behind me that I had been politely declining to ask about for most of my adult life. That was the plan. The plan, by Magdalena Vasquez's quiet announcement in the foyer approximately 90 seconds after I walked through the front door, was not going to happen. I want to tell you why. But first, let me tell you what Magdalena Vasquez explained to me at the kitchen table of that farmhouse on the morning of a Tuesday in late spring, 6 months and 11 days after my wife's funeral, while Wendell sat in his wheelchair in the living room watching a children's program on a television set placed at exactly the angle his neck could comfortably hold. She made me a cup of coffee. She sat down across from me. She told me, in the measured voice of a 58-year-old woman who'd been preparing to have this exact conversation for the previous 11 weeks, that my wife, Lena, had a son. She told me Wendell was born when Lena was 16 years old. She told me he was born with severe cerebral palsy, the result, by the tired explanation of the obstetrician who delivered him at Mansfield General Hospital 36 years ago, of a complication during labor that, in the medical state of the art in the late 1980s, was not the kind of complication a 16-year-old patient with no prenatal care and no family advocate in the delivery room was reliably going to walk away from with an undamaged child. She told me Wendell's biological father, a 24-year-old machinist from Mansfield named Daniel Hoffman, who Lena was seeing in secret against the explicit wishes of her parents for the previous 8 months, visited the hospital on the second day of Wendell's life, looked at the folded body of his newborn son, and walked out of the maternity ward without speaking to Lena. He moved to Modesto, California, 3 weeks later. He died 8 years ago of liver failure at the age of 52. He never came back. Here is what Lena's parents did. Wilhelm and Greta Bauer were German Lutheran immigrants who came to the United States in the late 1970s with 2 daughters, a Bible, $412, and the kind of immovable convictions about family honor that a 41-year-old farmer from the farming district outside Bremen brings with him when he has decided, on the basis of one cold winter and one disappointing harvest, to leave the country of his birth for good. They were not, by any reasonable accounting of the inheritance of language Lena brought with her into our marriage, equipped to handle what happened to their younger daughter in the year she turned 16. They did not throw her out. They did not tell the rest of the family. They told Lena, in the kitchen of the farmhouse in Ashland County where they'd been living for the previous 4 years, that the child would not be discussed. They told her she would finish high school. They told her she would tell no one outside the family. They told her she would, for the rest of her life, carry the burden of what she had done in the quiet of her own conscience, without speaking of it to friends, to teachers, to pastors, to future husbands, or to any other living person not present at the kitchen table of the farmhouse on the night they were having this conversation. She agreed. She agreed because she was 16 and her mother was crying. She agreed because her father, a man who raised her on stories of the patient ways his own German grandmother carried similar burdens through 2 world wars, told her, in the tired voice of a 45-year-old immigrant farmer, who, in 8 months of his daughter's secret relationship with Daniel Hoffman, never once raised his voice to her, that this was the only way the family was going to survive what was happening. She agreed. She kept her promise. She kept it for the next 36 years. The year after Wendell was born was the year everything changed. Wilhelm and Greta Bauer died in a head-on collision with a semi-truck on Interstate 71 outside Ashland, Ohio, 11 months after Wendell was born. They were driving back from a Lutheran convention in Cleveland. It was raining. The semi-truck driver, who was unhurt, told the police that in the 7 seconds between the moment he first saw the Bauers' 1984 Ford Tempo cross the center line and the moment of impact, he was not able to react. Lena was 17 years old. She was a single mother of a severely disabled 1-year-old. She inherited the farmhouse, the 4 acres of agricultural land around it, the Ford Tempo's insurance settlement, and a $4,000 life insurance policy her father paid premiums on for the previous 11 years. She moved out of the farmhouse into a 1-bedroom apartment in Mansfield. She brought Wendell with her. She enrolled in evening classes to finish her high school diploma. She worked during the day at a bookkeeping firm where the senior partner, a woman named Helga Voss, Lena's mother's older sister, who knew the truth about Wendell because Lena's mother told her, in the private way, an older immigrant sister tells the older sister back home about the private shame her daughter brought to the family, paid her in cash, and kept Wendell at her own house during business hours. She did this for the next 5 years. 5 years as a teenage single mother of a severely disabled child does something to a young woman forbidden, by her dead parents' last living wish, from telling another human being about her circumstances. I cannot, however, tell you adequately, because Lena herself was never able to tell me adequately. She wrote about it, in a letter she left for me at this farmhouse, in language that I am going to share with you when we get to it. She nearly did not survive. She tried, once, on a Sunday afternoon, when Wendell was approximately 5 years old, to do the thing a 22-year-old woman in her position is statistically far more likely to do than the rest of us are comfortable admitting. She did not succeed. She was found by her Aunt Helga Voss in the bathroom of the apartment in Mansfield, approximately 90 minutes after she swallowed the bottle of her father's old prescription she'd been saving in the back of a kitchen cabinet for the previous 3 years. She spent 4 days in the hospital. A social worker named Margaret Doyle, who was assigned to her case by Richland County Children's Services on the 3rd day of her hospitalization, sat down with her on the 4th day and told her, in the steady professional voice of a 48-year-old county social worker who'd been doing this work since the late 1960s, that Lena was going to die within the next 12 months if she did not find a way to live a life that included something other than her son. Margaret helped her arrange in-home care. She helped her find the first caregiver, a Lutheran widow from Loudonville named Ingrid Wagner, who lived 3 miles from the farmhouse, who would come to the farmhouse 5 days a week and stay with Wendell. She helped Lena move back into the farmhouse, restore it to a livable condition with the modest insurance money she'd been saving, install ramps and lifts and the equipment Wendell needed. She helped Lena get a bookkeeping job in Akron, an hour's drive away. She helped Lena rent an apartment in Akron during the work week. She helped Lena understand that the life Lena was going to live for the next several decades was going to be the life of a woman who visited her son on the 3rd Saturday of every month, and who built in the rest of the days of the calendar a separate life that would give her the strength to keep coming back to him. Lena agreed. She moved to Akron. She kept her promise to her parents. She did not tell another living person about Wendell. She visited him every 3rd Saturday for the next 30 years. She paid for his care, first out of her bookkeeping salary, then out of a trust she set up with a Cleveland attorney named Edmund Carrington in her mid-40s, funded by the steady savings of a woman who lived in a ranch house in Hillette and drove a 2019 Subaru Outback, and never, by any honest accounting of the lifestyle she could have afforded, spent money on herself the way the women at her accounting firm spent money on themselves. She met me in Akron when she was 28 years old. She married me in Cuyahoga Falls when she was 29. She kept her promise. Edmund Carrington called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. It was about 6 months after Lena's funeral. Edmund Carrington is 67 years old. He is a senior estate attorney at a firm called Carrington and Brace on Euclid Avenue in downtown Cleveland. He was Lena's attorney for the previous 12 years. He drew up her will, her power of attorney, her medical directives, and the trust she set up for Wendell's care. He was the only person, besides Magdalena Vasquez and Petra Schroeder and Helga Voss and Ingrid Wagner and Margaret Doyle, who knew the truth about Lena's son for any meaningful portion of Lena's adult life. He handed me a manila envelope. He handed me a set of keys. He told me the keys were to the farmhouse in Ashland County. He told me there was a letter in the envelope from my wife. He told me I should read the letter before I drove to the farmhouse. He told me, in the measured, tired voice of a 67-year-old estate attorney who'd been handling situations like this one for the previous 30 years of his professional life, that what I was about to learn was going to be difficult, that he was sorry he wasn't able to tell me earlier, and that the woman I'd been married to for 23 years had loved me, by his own honest professional reading of the private way she'd spoken about me during the previous 12 years of their attorney-client relationship, far more than I was, in the next several hours, going to feel like she had. I drove home. I sat at our kitchen table. I read the letter. I want to tell you what was in the letter. Jasper, if you are reading this, I am dead, and Edmund has given you the keys to the farmhouse, and you are about to learn the thing I should have told you 23 years ago. I am sorry. I have been trying, for the previous 23 years, to find the right moment to tell you. I did not find it. I do not know if such a moment exists. I am writing this letter to you in the office of the farmhouse. On a Saturday afternoon, in the early autumn of the year, I was diagnosed with my cancer, and I'm going to leave it with Edmund along with the keys and the trust documents and the patient paperwork of a life I've been keeping separate from yours. I have a son. His name is Wendell. He is 36 years old. He was born when I was 16 in a hospital in Mansfield, Ohio, on a night I have not, in the 36 years since, ever been able to describe to anyone in a way that does not make me cry. He has cerebral palsy. He cannot walk. He cannot speak. He cannot, by the medical assessment of the neurologists who have been treating him since he was 3 years old, ever be expected to live independently. He has lived for the previous 30 years at my parents' farmhouse in Ashland County, in the care of a steady rotation of caregivers I've hired and paid out of my own savings since I was 22 years old. I visited him on the third Saturday of every month for the previous 30 years, while you were home in Ellet, mowing the lawn or watching the Browns or repairing washing machines for the customers you have been so good to for so long. I am sorry I lied to you about where I was going. I am sorry I lied to you about everything. I want you to know, before I tell you the rest, that the reason I did not tell you was not that I did not trust you. The reason I did not tell you was that I made a promise to my parents on the night they sat me down at the kitchen table of the farmhouse and asked me, in the tired voice of 2 German Lutheran immigrants who were never, by any reasonable accounting of the values they brought with them to this country, equipped to handle what happened to their younger daughter, to carry this thing in silence for the rest of my life. I agreed. I was 16. They died 11 months later. The promise outlived them. I could not break it. I tried, on our second date, to tell you. I lost my nerve. I tried, on the night before we got married, to tell you. I lost my nerve. I tried, at every major moment of our 23 years together. Your 40th birthday, the year your father died, the morning we found out we could not have children, to tell you. I lost my nerve every single time. By the time I knew I was sick, the promise was so old it had calcified into a thing I could not have explained even if I wanted to. Edmund has the keys. The farmhouse is yours now. The trust I set up will continue to pay Magdalena and Petra for as long as Wendell is alive. You do not have to keep him. You can move him to a state-licensed facility. The trust will pay for that too. I am not asking you to be his father. I gave up the right to ask you for anything when I made the choice, 23 years ago, not to tell you that he existed. I am asking you for one thing. Visit him. Once. Just one Saturday. He has been looking at a photograph of you on his bedside table for the previous 20 years. I told him about you. He knows your name. He knows your face. He has been waiting, in the patient way Wendell waits for things, to meet you. I am sorry. I loved you. I will love you for as long as anything of me continues to exist after this letter is written. Lena. The next 11 hours were the longest of my life. I did not, in those 11 hours, leave the kitchen table of the ranch house in Ellet I'd been sharing with Lena for the previous 23 years. I read the letter 4 times. I read it the first time the way a man reads a letter from his dead wife when he is still trying to understand what the letter is telling him. I read it the second time the way a man reads it after he's understood. I read it the third time the way a man reads it when he is angry. I read it the 4th time the way a man reads it when he is no longer angry, but does not yet know what he is instead. I thought, in those 11 hours, about a lot of things. I thought about the 3rd Saturdays of the previous 23 years. I thought about the way Lena would get up at 5:30 in the morning, pack an overnight bag the night before, and leave the house at 6:15 without making coffee, which was unlike her, because on every other morning of the previous 23 years she made coffee, because, by my best honest reading of what the letter had just told me, she did not want the smell of coffee to wake me up and create a conversation in which she would have to lie to me about where she was going. I thought about the way she would come back on Saturday evenings with a quiet that was not the quiet of a woman who'd been running errands, but the quiet of a woman who'd been doing something I was not equipped to understand. I thought about her parents, and about Lena's aunt Helga Voss, who I'd met approximately 3 times in 23 years, at family weddings and funerals, and who I considered a reserved Lutheran widow from Lodenville, who did not particularly care for me. Helga was, by Magdalena's account that morning, the only living relative of Lena who knew the truth about Wendell, and carried it, along with Lena, for the previous 50 years of her own life. I thought about my own mother, who died 4 years ago, what she said, in the year before Lena and I got married, about Lena being secretive in a way she did not trust. My mother was more right than I was prepared to admit at the time, and more wrong than I would have been prepared to admit to Lena. I thought about the fact that I would never, in the rest of my life, be able to apologize to Lena for any of the things I needed to apologize for because she was dead. The sun came up at 5:47. I made a pot of coffee. I drank 1 cup standing at the kitchen counter. I poured the rest into a thermos. I put on the same blue Carhartt jacket I'd been wearing on appliance repair calls for the previous 9 years. I drove to the farmhouse the next morning. I took the back roads. I did not, in retrospect, know exactly why I took the back roads instead of the interstate. Interstate 71 south from Akron to the exit at Polk in Ashland County would have, by any reasonable accounting of the distance and the speed limit, taken me about an hour and 15 minutes. The back roads, Route 224 west to Lodi, then Route 301 south through Spencer and Greenwich and Plymouth, took me almost 3 hours. I drove past a lot of farms. I drove past 3 Lutheran churches, one of which, a white clapboard building in Greenwich with a graveyard in back, had a sign out front that read, in white letters on a black background, "He carried what we could not carry." Romans 15:1. I sat in the parking lot of that church for about 11 minutes. I did not go inside. I kept driving. I got to the farmhouse a little after 10 in the morning. The farmhouse, from the gravel road that ran past it, looked like this. It was a white 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a steep tin roof, and a brick chimney on the south end. The paint was clean. The roof was new. The porch had been recently reinforced with steel cables and modern joists in a way that did not, by my own quiet professional accounting of the work of contractors I have hired over the previous 26 years, look like a do-it-yourself job. Someone had been maintaining the building, and maintaining it well, for a long time. There was a wheelchair ramp on the north side of the porch. It was new. It was not, by any reasonable interpretation of what I had been thinking about my dead wife's monthly errands for the previous 6 months, the kind of feature you put on a farmhouse you visit twice a year to check the pipes. I sat in my truck in the gravel driveway for about 3 minutes. I looked at the wheelchair ramp. I looked at the wraparound porch. I looked at the curtains in the front windows. Clean curtains, in a pattern of blue flowers, that someone had clearly washed within the last month. I looked at the smoke coming from the brick chimney. I got out of the truck. I walked up the wheelchair ramp. I stood at the front door for about 4 seconds. I knocked. Nobody answered. I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. Here is what happened next. The next 4 hours unfolded slowly. Magdalena Vasquez made me a second cup of coffee. She told me Lena hired her 22 years ago, about a year after Lena married me, to replace an older caregiver named Ingrid Wagner, who retired. She told me Petra Schroeder was hired 11 years ago to give Magdalena weekend coverage. She told me they both lived in a converted cabin behind the farmhouse and paid through the trust Edmund administered in steady salaried amounts including health insurance, paid vacation, and a retirement contribution. She told me Wendell's daily routine. She told me what he ate, when he slept, what he liked to watch, the names of the 3 children's programs that, per the private assessment of a 36-year-old man with the developmental capacity of a 4-year-old, were the only programs he tolerated. She told me he liked the windows open in the morning. She told me he liked to be read to from the newspaper. She told me he liked, on warm days, to sit on the front porch and listen to the steady sounds of a rural Ohio afternoon. The cows from the dairy farm half a mile down the road, the wind in the old maple in the yard, the occasional truck on the county road. She told me he was, by any reasonable accounting of a man in his condition, a happy person. She told me he loved his mother. She told me he was told, in the gentle voice Magdalena uses when she is telling Wendell things he cannot fully process, that his mother was away for a long time, and that, in the 6 months since the funeral he was not brought to, he had not entirely stopped looking at the door on the 3rd Saturday of each month. I sat with Wendell for the next 2 hours. He looked at me. He made the sound he made when I first walked in. He pointed, with a hand that did not entirely cooperate with what he was trying to do with it, at a framed photograph on the side table next to his wheelchair. The photograph was of me. It was a picture Lena took of me approximately 11 years ago at a midsummer picnic at her firm. I was holding a paper plate. I was laughing at something her boss just said. I was wearing a blue shirt I no longer owned. Wendell looked at the photograph. He looked at me. He made the sound again. Magdalena, in the patient voice of a woman who'd been translating Wendell's sounds for the previous 22 years, told me the sound was the sound Wendell made when he recognized something he'd been waiting a long time to recognize. I did not, in the next 90 minutes, leave the chair next to Wendell's wheelchair. I read him 3 articles from the local paper. I let him point at the photograph. I told him, in a voice I did not entirely recognize as my own, that I was sorry it took me 36 years to walk through the front door of his grandparents' farmhouse. He made the sound again. I drove home that night. I did not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table of the ranch house in Alette for approximately 6 hours, with the letter in front of me, and I tried to figure out what kind of man I was going to be in the next 20 years of my life. I want to tell you what I decided. I decided that I was not going to be the kind of man who let his late wife's son be moved to a state-licensed facility because the man she'd married was not, by his own quiet accounting of his previous 54 years of life, prepared to rearrange his existence around a 36-year-old stepson he did not, until the morning of the previous day, know existed. I decided I was going to be a different kind of man. The 6 months that followed reshaped my life. I sold the appliance repair business to my second cousin Garrett, who'd been working for me for the previous 11 years, and who, for the previous 4 of those years, was quietly hoping I would eventually let him buy it. I sold the ranch house in Alette to a young couple who were expecting their first child in the late autumn. I moved into the farmhouse. I converted the second bedroom into an office. I built a wheelchair ramp from the back porch down to the flat patch of yard where Wendell liked to sit in the afternoon. I learned, from Magdalena and Petra, the steady rhythms of taking care of a 36-year-old man with severe cerebral palsy. I learned how to lift him from his wheelchair to his bed without hurting either of us. I learned what to feed him for breakfast on a Tuesday and what to feed him for lunch on a Saturday. I learned what the sounds he made meant in the private vocabulary of a young man whose mother had been the only person, for 36 years, who had been able to fully translate them. I learned, in the slow accumulation of mornings on the front porch with the newspaper and afternoons on the back porch with the cows from the dairy farm, what my wife had been doing on the 3rd Saturday of every month for the previous 23 years of our marriage. 3 weeks ago, on a Saturday morning, something happened. It was the 3rd Saturday of the month. I was on the front porch of the farmhouse with Wendell, who was in his wheelchair next to me, and Magdalena, who had brought us out 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for her, with a carton of vanilla pudding she had been spoon-feeding to Wendell since he was approximately 12 years old. The sun was up. The cows from the dairy farm were making the sounds cows make on a Saturday morning. I was reading the front page of the Akron Beacon Journal to Wendell. He was making the sound he makes when he is content. I looked at him for about a minute. I looked at the photograph of Lena on the side table inside the front window, the one Magdalena had brought out of Wendell's bedroom the day I moved in, and placed where Wendell could see it from his porch chair. I want to tell you what I had not understood about my marriage until that morning on the porch. For the previous 23 years, I understood I was married to a private woman who did not enjoy talking about her own feelings. I understood her parents died when she was young, and she did not enjoy talking about it. I understood her Aunt Helga was the closest thing she had to a parent figure, and that she visited her aunt with the kind of dutiful reserve that people who do not particularly enjoy their living relatives bring to visits with living relatives. I understood she worked as a bookkeeper, made a steady salary, was good with money, and did not enjoy talking about money. I understood she did not want children, a thing she told me on our 3rd date, and a thing I agreed to because I was 29 years old and in love with her, and because by my own quiet accounting of the kind of life I thought I wanted at 29, the absence of children was the kind of trade-off a man my age could accept. I understood she preferred to keep her professional life separate from her personal life. I understood she preferred to take her monthly errand trips alone. I understood many things about my wife. I did not understand the one thing about my wife that, in retrospect, would have explained all the other things I understood, which was that she was raising a son she could not tell me about, in a farmhouse she could not bring me to, with the help of a quiet cluster of women whose names she could not say in our kitchen. She could not have children with me because she already had one. She did not enjoy talking about her parents because they made her promise. She kept her professional life separate because her personal life was already separate. She visited her Aunt Helga with reserve because her Aunt Helga was the only living human being she could talk to about the things she could not talk to me about. She took her monthly errand trips alone because she was not running errands. I had been married, for the previous 23 years, to a woman who was carrying a thing I could have helped her carry, and who could not ask me to help her carry it because she'd agreed, at 16, in the kitchen of a German Lutheran immigrant farmhouse, not to ask anyone. I want to tell you what I told Lena on the porch that morning. I told her, in the quiet private voice a man uses when he is talking to a wife who has been dead for the previous 12 months, that I'd been wrong about her. I told her she was not hiding from me. I told her she'd been carrying. I told her that the woman I'd been married to for 23 years was the strongest person I'd ever known, and that I was sorry I never, in those 23 years, recognized it. Wendell made the sound he makes when he is content. I went back to reading the front page. The cows kept making their sounds. Magdalena went inside to start lunch. I sat on the front porch of the farmhouse my wife forbade me from visiting for the previous 23 years of our marriage, with the 36-year-old son she'd been hiding from me for the same 23 years, and I finished my coffee. It was about 9:30 in the morning. There was a school bus on the county road picking up the Hochstetler kids 2 driveways down, the way it picked them up every weekday morning at about that time, and the way it picked up the Hochstetler kids and their parents and the parents before them, by Magdalena's accounting, for the previous 4 decades. Wendell looked at the school bus. He made the sound he makes when he sees the school bus. It was, by Magdalena's translation, the sound he'd been making at the school bus on every weekday morning of every year I was married to his mother, on a porch she'd been sitting on without me for the previous 23 years. I made a note, in the quiet of my own head, to be on the porch tomorrow morning at the same time. I was going to learn the sound. What did the person you loved most carry alone? And how long did it take you to see it? Comment your answer below. 1 sentence is enough. I read every single one. Some women reading this tonight have been married to men who carried things they did not, by the end of those marriages, ever tell. Some men reading this tonight have been married to women who carried things they did not, by the end of those marriages, ever tell. Some of those things were small. Some of them were not small. Some of them were the kind of thing a person carries alone, in the private silence of a 36-year-old promise to dead parents, because the person who would have been able to share the carrying did not, by the time the carrier met them, exist in their life yet. And by the time they did exist, the carrying had been going on so long that the carrier no longer knew how to put it down. You do not always know what the person you love is carrying. Most people don't. Most people spend the private decades of their lives walking next to a husband, a wife, a brother, a sister, a parent, or a child whose private burden they do not, in those decades, ever fully understand. Sometimes you find out while they're alive. Sometimes you find out at the kitchen table of a farmhouse you did not know existed, half a year after they are dead, with a letter in your hand, and a 36-year-old stepson in the next room, making a sound you do not yet know how to translate. Tell me, in the comments, what the person you loved most carried alone. Tell me when you found out. Tell me what you did with what you learned. I will read every single answer.